All right, Alex. So I'm putting together your own special edition of this slideshow. This is not my slideshow. I haven't had time really to put together, excuse me, any slideshows for the last GIS course, nor for this one, because both times that I've taught this course, it's been sprung on me kind of at the last minute. So you'll have to apologize. I wish I had my own set of slides on this other information I'd like to convey, but I just can't, I just don't have time to do it. So we'll just follow a pre-existing slideshow. This is one that I believe Brian Schneider put together a few years ago. So I don't think you're going to learn anything new with this, so just kind of sit back and relax. And if anything new does pop out, then good for me, right? But I kind of doubt that that's going to be the case. So but I did want to go through this, so we do have a formal lecture that's going along with this class. So anyway, I'm just going to do a little introduction to GIS systems. And, you know, again, you've had the full-blown GIS class, plus I've seen the work that you've done. You fully understand what a GIS is capable of doing. One of the things that's always kind of been fun for me over the years is finding out how much I don't know about GIS. There's always something new that you can learn with it. It's an absolutely amazing system that's continuously improving and morphing and being able to do, you know, almost at exponential rate, more and more capabilities. It's phenomenal working with it. And one of these days we're going to come back and look at these old antiquated computer-based systems, and probably everything's going to be, you know, virtual reality and everything. So we're all moving in that direction. We're there already. It's just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to the technology. So there's some amazing things going on out there. But in general, a geographic information system is basically, it's a computer system that's able to do these 5 things. Okay, so it can assemble and store data, be able to manipulate data, and probably the 2 most powerful things that it's able to do is to analyze the data, and so that we can draw conclusions from 2 or more different data sets. We can allow them to help us to analyze what's going on and answer questions about some of the things that may or may not be going on out there in the real world. And then being able to display that information. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's been proven through time, through history, that maps are very, very good tools for spreading propaganda. So you know, the map only says what you want it to say. So and that's kind of a lesson that we draw from the art of displaying data, using the proper colors to display certain things, and to convey a story, really. We're using the map to tell a story. You know, if we wanted to map everything in the world out there, the map would be way too busy. So we create the map in such a way that it's displaying that information that we want to get across to people. So very powerful tool for doing that. And it's always working with geographically referenced data. Okay, so it always knows where it is in the world. That way, when you add more data to it, all that data knows where it's supposed to go. But and there's lots of mapping software that's out there. But the thing that makes GIS really important is Google Earth is a really good example of a very, very excellent spatial data tool. What it doesn't have is the tabular data. And the tabular data is as you know, it's the information about the spatial data. That is probably the most powerful part of the GIS, is being able to not only show things, but to ask questions about those things and be able to answer those questions. So for a road, a question might be, what is the surface material of the road? And the answers to that might be maybe gravel, maybe dirt, maybe asphalt, maybe concrete. All right, so being able to answer those questions about various road types, and same with just about anything. You know, a forested area or a timber stand. You know, what's the age of that stand? What's the species? And that allows us to build this database information on our spatial data, and which allows us to ask questions ultimately about our spatial data. So I can go, all right, Mr. GIS, for Haywood County, show me all the roads that are gravel, or show me all the locations where roads need repair in Haywood County. And then I can, the GIS will be able to query through the database table, find all those features that are for either road repair or all the line features where roads surface type equals gravel, and it'll select all those roads and display them for me. So very, very powerful tool for being able to answer spatial queries and those sorts of things. So, okay, now I'm just scratching the surface, obviously. I'm sure you've messed with this for, quite some time now, so you're probably well aware of some of the ways that we can go about querying data. So, and of course, I know you're familiar with this as well. So how do we portray data? Well, a vector-based GIS, as opposed to raster, which you realize is, aerial photography or surface maps or those sorts of things, is different. It's kind of a raster-based where it's a big grid, and each cell in the grid is assigned a value. A vector-based system is different, and the vector-based system breaks maps up into either point features, line features, or polygon features, okay? And then it annotates those features as well. So you can include annotation in your map. What's really kind of funny is this picture right here is actually a raster grid. All it is a topo map that's been scanned in. This is not actually true vector data that we're using to describe vector data in this slide. So go figure, right? All right, so let's move on down. Why do we use GISs? I don't actually, when I'm teaching GIS to foresters, I go, why do you need to spend $1,000 or more for a GIS that's all you're going to use is about 1% of its power? Why not just make maps on Google Earth or find some other mapping tools out there? Because most foresters don't need the power of a GIS, and there's lots and lots of very good mapping software that's out there nowadays. So that is a question I like to ask folks. I've taught tons of professionals GIS, and we usually, especially the older guys, usually within about 10 or 15 minutes, the eyes are glazing over and they're like going, oh my God, I got 3 more days of this. So, and they don't get as much out of it. But if you show them something simple like Google Earth, then they're all over it. They love it. So why do we use a GIS? Well, you use it because you're trying to really maintain a kind of a professional inventory of the work you're doing. I use GIS simply because I know it so well. It's not an issue for me to try to learn it. So anytime I do a forest management plan for landowner, I always do it in ArcGIS. It just works that way very well, and that data is stored in a format that I know how to use it. So I'm able to, down the road, after I've created this data set, I'm able to process and represent large quantities of spatial data. You working within the Forest Service, you're working with large tracts of land, and so you have definitely have a need for being able to maintain stuff in a very well-organized database system, and that you can go back and you can update it, you can maintain it, you can go back and query it, and you're actually using it for what its intended purpose is. A consulting forester, for the most part, doesn't use any of that extra power of it. So it's almost a waste of money for these guys. And then being able to convert field observations into digital maps. Okay, so I'm relating to some of our natural resource type uses for it, but of course GIS is used in just about all applied sciences. There's an example coming up here of one of the very first spatial analysis examples in history, and it was done back in the 1800s, and it was for medical purposes. It had nothing to do with natural resources or anything. So all kinds of folks are using this technology. So transportation systems, even busing systems in some of the um, larger counties where they have highly populated counties. They use GIS to determine what the busing routes are going to be for school systems. It's just used all across the board for just about everything. So anyway, let's take a quick look at what we talk about with GIS overlays. It's very important to know that in a GIS you can only stuff one vector type of information in one layer of data. So I can't mix points, lines, and areas in one layer there. So I have a layer there called stand types. It's a polygon layer type. I have information about each one of these stands in the polygon. But for the same area, I have a hydrology layer, and that hydrology includes line vector data showing where the streams are. Typically there's some sort of a connector point and the water knows that it needs to flow this way. That's when you're getting into some of the more sophisticated topological features that GIS has. Road systems for the same area, okay, again another line feature. On some of the more sophisticated transportation systems, they know which roads are one-way, which roads are two-way, which are on-ramps, off-ramps, and stuff like that. So that's why we can do things like tell my Google Maps that I'm trying to get from here to Raleigh, and it plans out the proper route for me rather than sending me down a one-way road going the wrong way. And that's all this topological information that's associated with each one of those road segments. Topography, okay, again, this could be any number of ways of depicting elevation. This just happens to be a series of lines, line vectors that are really have no other purpose in life except to show what the elevational range, what the contour is of the elevations, and you can't really use this for slope calculations or aspect calculations. You could just look at it and glean information off of, that's a ridge, and this is, this is a drainage, that's a drainage, and this is a little ridge in between. So, and again, but the beauty of the GIS is I can turn on or off any one of these layers to get the information I need to be able to interpret that map. And so here's that early example of GIS. You've probably heard about this one before, but Dr. John Snow in London, he was having they're having some real problems with cholera epidemics and lots of deaths. And I don't know, somehow he got it in his crawl there that they might somehow be associated with the well water. Nobody really identified cholera and this death that was occurring as something that could be associated with germs, because nobody really knew anything about germs back in those days. So what he did, though, was, and I don't know the complete story behind it, but basically each one of these little black dots, he started to mark them down where people were dying, okay, and maybe not just dying, maybe not simply dying, but people who were getting sick. And then he also, I guess, maybe it was kind of an afterthought, but he noticed that there were certain wells that clumps of cholera folks seemed to be associated with. So these guys are drawing up, nobody seems to be getting sick over by this well, the little X mark, but a whole bunch of people seem to be getting sick over at this well. So he started, to him, he was able to draw a spatial relationship between the well sites and where people were getting sick. Basically, he told folks, let's close up this well, and closed up a couple others that were associated in some of those large clumps, and lo and behold, the cholera epidemic disappeared. And so he was a true hero, and he was one of the first people who was actually taking spatial data and drawing some sort of a conclusion about what's going on in the world. Pretty fascinating guy. So since then, everybody else in the world has been using GIS, or had decided to be able to use maps as ways of identifying various associations about the world around us. And again, to nowadays, we're using it in numerous different forms. Probably the most common ones that we tend to see are in the county governments, where we're looking at the parcel maps. And that's something that's very important to us as natural resource managers, is being able to identify a parcel of land, who are some of the other people around that parcel, and and be able to utilize that information in as part of our management planning, especially if we're working at the private sector and we're doing management plans for landowners. That's the first thing we need is the parcel. So all of our counties, thank goodness, now have a GIS, and I think every one of them has an online interactive GIS where you can query on property. Some of them are much more sophisticated than others. Go to Mecklenburg County, go to Wake County, and look at some of the systems they have, and they just blow you out of the water. Buncombe County's pretty sophisticated. Haven County's pretty good. The vast majority of them tend to give us the amount of information that's necessary in order to glean information about parcel data, sometimes soils, topography, stream systems, zoning, some of the more important things that we may need to know when we're doing exploration around some of these property. So they tend to give us that information. A couple of them are really cool. Check out someday, if you get a chance, Transylvania County's GIS. And when you select, I don't have it pulled up right here, and to save time, I'm not going to do it right now, but you can go out there, just Google Transylvania County, and you can, when you select a layer or select a parcel, it'll actually open up a little window on the side there, and will allow you to download that parcel in Shapefile or KLM or KML, Google Earth format. And I usually just choose Google Earth. So I could pull up a parcel. It'll download it in Google Earth, and it loads it right up into Google Earth with all the parcel information as well. So if I'm doing a landowner plan in Transylvania County, there's about 5 or 6 other counties that have bought into that particular system. All the folks. So every time I talk to somebody in county government and say, look, you really need to start doing this. Hopefully someday down the road, everybody will be doing that. To me, that's just what we really need, is to be able to. Rather than me having to download the whole county of parcel data, I'd much rather just download a parcel one at a time as I need them. So kind of cool. So county governments are very important, and they're getting better and better all the time. So another one that you've used, I know that you have because I've witnessed it, is the Web Soil Survey, and you probably are well aware of the fact that you can now import a shapefile into Web Soil Survey as an area of interest. So you don't have to go in there and click on the little AOI button over here and then digitize, heads up digitize your parcel, or what you think is your parcel. You can actually get your parcel off of a shapefile and then load it right on in there. So that's kind of nice. Here, I think Brian was just really introducing folks for the first time to it. So I think he's just went to Buncombe County and kind of zeroed in on that, found a parcel, believe he probably heads up digitized it in there, and the rest of the story, right? So, But the point is, it's just another very good use of a GIS. And what, of course, what they're doing is they're clipping the soils out from their GIS and then just making it available for you. And that's really handy because you can calculate the acres of the of each soil type that's inside your parcel. And then it allows you to do, a lot more, glean a lot more information, create the soil survey, custom soil survey for a property, download it, put the landowner's name on it, and look like a hero to the landowner, because they think, boy, oh boy, this person really develops a very professional looking soil survey document. And we just chuckle to ourselves and say, I didn't have to do all this. They did it for me. So that's kind of nice. So anyway, moving on. GIS is a tool for public management. Here we are kind of getting into your realm. And of course, when you're working with large tracts of land, that it is important that you have something like a full-blown GIS. Otherwise, it just gets too unwieldy. And so it allows you to, over time, start working with a data set like this buckhorn compartment. And you may have started out with getting some sort of a potential habitat, and that's just using the basically the what do they call it, the pre-European settlement. This is what it would look like if everybody just left it alone. So that was one way of creating of identifying what a habitat could look like, right? Given enough time to just maintain itself. But then you can also compare that with what the actual habitat happens to be. I always try to encourage people when they are creating different maps of different vegetation type. My rule of thumb for folks is digitize what you can and GPS the rest. Okay, so whatever you can see from aerial photography and you can heads up digitize into a map, that's time well spent. It's much easier to get information in that you can clearly see off of an aerial photograph. So what are some of the ones that are really easy to see? A maintained opening, pretty easy. A low elevation granitic dome, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to be able to see just a bunch of heath and stuff growing in there. Okay, a white pine stand would stand out very, very easily. What won't? Well, you start getting into these montane oak hickories, montane alluvial forests. You really don't know where those boundaries are. And oak pine, pine oak heath could actually bleed into one of these low elevation granitics. It's kind of hard to tell the difference sometimes with those. All right, so a lot of times our hardwood forests or our non-evergreen forests are probably a little more difficult to tease apart, but some you can, and so that requires you going out into the field and doing some inventory work. And then while you're in the field, you could modify an existing map and redraw some boundaries, come back and digitize that in. So, soil types, we don't really know where those boundaries are. We have professionals best guess that for us. And sometimes, I'd say surprisingly, most of the time, they're very, very accurate about where those boundaries are. Sometimes they're off, but I've always been extremely impressed with the soils information that I've been getting from the folks who've done them in this part of the country. And it's because they've learned to read the land, basically the land forms and the geologic material that's there, and the slope and aspect and elevation, all those things. They have learned to read those and say, oh yeah, based on the higher elevation on a southwest facing ridge, I would expect not entirely sure, but I would expect with a high probability that an ash chestnut complex is going to be found there. Okay, and then they set some plots and they check that. So pretty cool stuff. But our soil maps are invaluable tools for us. So that's really kind of neat. So then you can start adding some more information to this map too. Okay, so you're building and building all this myriad of information that can be used, and this one is just simply what's the fire regime been in those particular areas. The drier ridges, you might expect it to be more often, and the moister areas you might expect it to be less often. And so that's in some way you might be coming up with probabilities for fire in those particular areas. Then you start looking at things like ecological departure, which you can glean that from. It may be, and I'm not saying that it is, but going back to these two, the potential habitat versus the actual habitat could lead to an ecological departure sort of map. This is what it should be. If left alone, this is what it is. And so there are folks who go out there and they do these types of departure indices where they are basically saying, I think this should be a southern and central Appalachian Cove, but it's but it's not. They come up with this departure index for how far away is it from its probably natural state. And then management sustainability might be things such as what. And again, I don't know what his bottom line was with this, what he was trying to prove with this particular map, but it's looking like harvest fire oak shelter wood is the type of management. Suitability. I'm sorry, I was reading sustainability. So basically, he's saying that all the green areas are suitable for doing the harvest and having a fire regime in there, and then ultimately trying to convert that into oak through oak shelter wood. And then these other areas, these might be some of the more open areas where they maintain by fire. Okay, so so this is a planning tool. This is they've based on a lot of this other information that they've thrown into these maps. They come up with these basic suitability indices that they think might be where they might want to go with a particular part of land that they're working on. So all kinds of neat stuff out there that these ecological and ecosystem managers are using in those ways. And they can do that on our public lands because they've got a big chunk of land to work with, and it's really kind of neat. So at the private level, this is the bread and butter for most for both the state and for private landowners. I mean private foresters who are working on management plans for landowners. So typically they're much smaller parcels, smaller tracts of land. I think the largest one I'd ever done was about 450 acres, so it requires either just a minimal amount of work or considerable amount of work to go out there and collect the data. But again, the management units are kind of broken into based on what the current vegetation is or what the landowner envisions that they might want to do with that particular area. So this vegetation may be very similar to that, but this landowner has decided that they want to do something different with this. So you get 2A and 2B, and they may have different management objectives for those particular things. So current use, that's just how they're using the particular land there. So in the natural resource consulting, okay, so I think one of the things that you had learned when you were working on forest management, your management plan, is it's always good to have a good locator map. This is kind of serving that purpose. you probably would want to zoom out a little bit further. They're just kind of showing in context of this person's property and their resources that this is the track that they're going to be working on. And then within that, somewhere I guess in here, there's that track right there. They're using some raster data to come up with some sort of a slope map. Okay, it's just basically from a digital elevation model, and I'm sure you did that in the GIS 101. I haven't seen that class in a long time, but I know that's something that we used to do, and it would take a DEM, and it would look at one raster cell's elevation, compare it to the raster cell next to it, and it would calculate the slope between those two raster cells and come up with a slope map for you. And so that allows you to see the steeper slopes versus the non-steep areas, and then everything in between. So again, you get this ridge that's running through here, it looks like. Could be a drainage right here. I'm starting to look more like a drainage to me, actually. So, and then you get the side slope. So anyway, you can see it's steeper here, though. And then as you're going down the side slope and into this little drainage area right here, then it's probably becoming less and less steep. Let's see. Yeah, now I can see what's going on. And of course, throwing it on top of aerial photography is very important. So getting the newest aerial photography is always the best thing that you can do. There are some really good sources out there for streaming aerial photography in ArcGIS, and hopefully when you do that lab, that will be something new for you, because I walk you through where you can load those up. So we are going to be using ArcGIS, obviously, and you're extremely familiar with all these parts of it. You've got ArcCatalog, and then you've where you can manipulate maps, manipulate data, copy data. You could also do a number of things in terms of the projections of data. So that's where I go when I'm modifying the projection of a data set so that it will work with other data sets. ArcMap is where you do most of your spatial analysis, and then you've got this whole series of tools out there that are just unbelievable, that allow you to do many things that are not at your fingertips here. They are there in the toolbox. So I'm sure you've probably explored some of those in the past as well. So, okay, I'm not going to dwell on these. I think you're probably yawning by now, looking at all this. This is just old hat for you. Okay, so what we're going to be doing in this first assignment is very simple. I've got a series of videos that you could watch and follow along with, hopefully, when you get ArcGIS on your computer. And it'll be, you'll be working primarily with shapefiles. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I think the hay fever has gotten down into my lungs here. So we're going to be probably, it walks you through, getting aerial photography, not static aerial photography. I'm going to be using this live streaming aerial photography from NC1 map. Hopefully you're familiar with that. If not, you will be. It's very easy to use. Topographic maps that you can you can get as base maps. Parcel maps that you can live stream as well off of NC1 map. That's kind of handy. And let's see. Like I said, we're going to be working primarily in shapefiles. I tend not to work when in the GIS. I'm sorry, in the Forestry 215 class. I tend not to work with geodatabases. I think they're fantastic. I use them all the time, but I think they tend to be a little bit confusing for students, especially if they're trying to share data back and forth. You got to export it into a format that can be pulled into another. Typically you export it as a shapefile, and then you can share your data with other people. So it just makes it a little bit easier to just to stay in the old-fashioned shapefile format. So going to be kind of doing some of that, and of course you're familiar with how you work with the data. You've got a data view, and that's this little tool at the very bottom left, and then the one right next to it is the layout view, and that's where you actually create your final map product. So the data view is where you pull in your data layers, and you're able to turn layers on and off, edit data, color your data, do the symbology the way you want it, and all that good stuff. There are a couple of different things in the table, ways that you could look at this table of context. The thing that's important to remember, a lot of folks forget this, is when you're trying to put one layer on top of, trying to move one layer from here up to here, you got to be in this little view of the table of contents, and that allows you to grab layers and move them around a little bit. So anyway, what's cool about ArcGIS, ArcCatalogs, they typically show you what the format of the layers are. Okay, so this is showing its points, lines, and areas. And of course, as you are well aware, that a shapefile is not just one file, but a shapefile is a series of files that all work together. And ArcGIS needs at least the .shp, the .shx, the .dbf, and the .prj. Those are the four most important files that can be used. And then as you start building some more advanced features, you create these SBNs and the AVL files and those sorts of things. But if you are sharing data, it's always good to just select that whole group right there and then send it on out. Okay. So again, the power behind a GIS is the ability to store database information about each one of the features in your data set. So this happens to be a file, a spatial file or a map file of all the U.S. states. Each state is given one line in the database. Okay, so this state right here is obviously Virginia, and so if I clicked on it, if I selected it, this line would become selected. Okay, all the information about Virginia that they want you to have in this database table is all on that line. So states such as the federal identification something number, I can't remember what it's called, but the FIPS number is the identification number for that state. What's the region that it's in, what's the abbreviation, and you just keep scrolling over, and there's just all these things out there that are associated with that particular file or with that particular state. Geodatabases, on the other hand, you don't have to go through it doesn't piecemeal files like shapefiles do, where you can end up with a gazillion shapefiles in one folder, and sometimes it's a little unwieldy to use. It's kind of hard to keep track of where things are. Geodatabases was a way that they could try to organize that information. So everything is stored in its own little database. I can't go and see each individual thing on the if I open it up in like Windows File Manager. It just won't show me all that stuff. All I'll see is this MDB file, this database file, and but within it, I've got these different feature data sets, and you can see that little plus sign means that there's more stuff inside there. So if I clicked on that, I would see this whole array of infrastructure layers pop up. Same for transportation. It would be different road types, maybe even railroad and stuff like that in there. Within the feature data sets, you have these different classes of features. Okay, and I could mix and match. That's the kind of the beauty of this. I don't have to have all just polygons in the wildlife data set. I could actually have point layers in there, and I can have line layers. This is just showing polygons right there, but so that's one of the beauties of a geodatabase is I can really just start organizing my stuff contextually. All right, so I have this featured data set. I want all my wildlife polygon data to be stored in there, and so it allows me to do that. Okay, so it's really handy. They're very simple to create, very simple to modify, and so definitely think that's a very good way to go if you start exploring them. And I'm sure you have. That's in the 111 class. I can almost guarantee that that would be something that they would teach you in there. So I'm preaching to the choir here. So anyway, that's pretty much it for now. I'm going to go ahead and let you get started when you get a chance. Now again, and I told you in that email, if you don't get ArcGIS for a few more days, don't sweat it. I think you're going to fly through that homework assignment. And it's just follow along with James here, and you'll probably be moving along at a faster pace than I'm talking even. But there is one thing that's in there that is kind of interesting, and that's just a way of setting up, one of many, many different ways of setting up inventory points into the GIS. And I kind of start at the point where it's already been loaded onto your computer, and loaded up onto GIS. This is an extension called, what's it called again? Oh geez, I can't even remember what it's called now. But anyway, I'll pull it up. It's in the program files and adjacent. There we go. It's called repeating shapes. So you can get online and download it onto your computer once you get ArcGIS on there, and then when you open up, it'll set it up onto your computer, and they'll actually put it into this program file in Genesis. And when you do that, then you can start taking a look at I think, yeah, this text document that will walk you through. Oh, that wasn't it. Somewhere in here is a well, this PDF file will walk you through too. There's actually a text file that kind of makes it a lot easier to do. But the repeating shapefiles PDF file in there walks you through the install. Okay, so give it a try. If you're having trouble with it, by all means, give me a call and we'll get it set up. And I think you'll like it. I think once you get it in, it's just a really fast way of setting up inventory plots, and you can make them as spread apart or as condensed as you want. And it's just when it's going through this registration process, it's a little weird. So that's the area where you might get hung up on it. But go ahead and see if you can dig your way through. This will be your first test to see how good you can do that. And, all right, so anyway, I wish you well, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, y'all take care.